Hello and welcome to another episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. We have a lot for you today. We're going to be talking about the news, the EV tax credit dying, Cybertruck sales cratering, cafe fines going to zero. Seems like a whole lot of things are coming unglued. We'll also dive into serial hybrids, why they're a problem, the truth about reliability, and of course, those viewer questions and reviews. So let's roll that intro and get to it. So, Travis, did you honestly think that the EV tax credit was going to disappear? For some reason, I was dumb enough to think that maybe it would hang out and just get cut back.
It felt like it was forgotten, and my fingers were crossed that it was like, ooh, did they? Maybe. Is it going to be stuck in the corner? Did we not notice it? Let's not talk about it. Nobody said the word. Unfortunately, it didn't matter. Somebody remembered it. It made it into a big bill of sorts. And, why have an episode talking about individual cars? We can talk about the entire structure of the automotive industry, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this is going to move things. We don't know how, but things are going to be changing.
I just assumed they were going to be so fixated on, how exactly they could remove more people from health insurance that they would forget about the EV tax credit. But turns out they could do both. Turns out they can walk and chew gum. Did I say that out loud? My
So,
bad.
a weird question: is it Elon's fault? Did somebody say, "Hey, you know what we need to make sure we do is get Elon somewhere somehow"? Is that what happened? Because it's possible.
I don't know. Part of me does wonder on this, obviously bad, crazy stuff that we both disagree with would still have happened. But I do kind of wonder if there had been a carve out, if somehow Elon had stayed on the MAGA bandwagon for a little bit longer. But
Yeah, hold it out,
there
man.
wasn't there wasn't a natural synergy there to begin with. I never understood it.
We've talked
Uh
about that a few times off camera.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it has happened. Let's just try and stick with it here for a while. But at any rate,
yeah.
back onto the actual pressing car topic, because we're veering off into the dangerous world of politics.
Only
Um,
that.
the EV tax credit is dead as of September. So if you want yourself an EV with the tax credit, better act fast.
Yeah, I mean, it was already a fairly limited number of vehicles that got access to it, but not none, and not
Mm-hmm.
vehicles that are not in volume either. I mean, that's the big thing is like, yes, the
Yeah,
variety was much smaller than it had been a year or so ago, but there was still a lot of volume vehicles that could be sold. So, yeah,
indeed there
now's the
were.
time to do it.
And there were the hopes of more to come because especially Hyundai and Kia have invested billions and billions of dollars building factories in the United States to build EVs and their batteries and everything here.
Hmm.
Major earth-moving choices for manufacturing and product pipeline and component pipeline stuff had moved to the US in order to facilitate EV manufacturing. And now I do wonder what's going to keep it here.
I mean, it depends on how firmly they believe in sunk cost. I think
Mhm.
it's going to be a big part of it. Is now you have to look at the structuring and say, okay, let's say it was X% more expensive over here to produce everything and make it all work, but that was going to be offset by this growth, by this percentage, by this margin, etc., whatever, by this volume, and now it's not. Okay,
Mhm.
how big of a hit is that volume going to take? I think the hard part here is that there's I didn't mean hyperbole here. Like the entire automotive structure is going to be changing. The landscape is going to be changing here over the next couple of months as these things start to settle, as our economy does or doesn't. You know what I mean? We're not using big words like that, but you know what I'm talking about. The question is, how big of an impact is it going to be, and
Mhm.
should they just pull the plug right now and say, nope, this does not pan out in our favor? I think the bigger question is what work has been done to kind of decommission or repurpose some of the other assembly lines, manufacturing capacity, that sort of thing. That I think is going to be a big determining factor on whether or not they pull the plug over here because it's more expensive to do it over here. That's why we had to incentivize them. That's the way these things work. Now the incentive's gone. Goodwill doesn't make for good business.
Yeah. It does appear that we don't have an automotive industry total, but we know that there have been random layoffs here and there, seemingly possibly related to this, mostly the tariff side of things and the slowdown in the industry, which is important to understand for folks out there that are shopping. If you're really debating, should I or shouldn't I buy a car now, and you are in a good financial position to do so, I would say do so now, because used car prices are definitely ticking upwards. So you might get a better deal on your trade in. New car prices definitely seem to be on a strong upward tick already, with more to come, because not all of the tariffs have hit. And with the threat of more tariffs, especially on some of our larger import partners, South Korea and Japan, for the US auto market, they may be hitting even stronger later in the year. But according to Manheim, who runs one of the largest used car auctions in the US, average car prices on the used market are up 6.3% year over year. That's a pretty massive increase. And lease end supplies are tightening, they said. So people are choosing to buy their leases out yet again, just like in COVID, instead of lease returning them, which is part of this problem. And new car sales are also down 4.2%. And this is something we've said over and over and over again when people do the, oh, you should buy a used car instead of the new car. Well, that's up to you. It's a personal decision. But remember, for you to buy the used car, someone had to buy it new.
Yeah, is it your responsibility? Probably not, but it's just a way things work. Someone has to buy the new car for you to have to use. And now, if I were leasing a vehicle, assuming that something hadn't just like exploded out of my budget, I probably wouldn't be purchasing my vehicle and keeping it. I would say now is a good time to consider purchasing it instead of just returning it, as using
Mm-hmm.
it as a trade-in. Obviously, some manufacturers you can, some you can't. But that's one of those, hey, this might be that window where your vehicle is
Yep.
actually worth more than they said it was, and you can go ahead and cash in a little bit. But it gets tough because, and this is the bigger impact issue, is that people are buying used cars a lot of the time because they can't afford a new car, and therefore, when the used cars get more expensive, it hits those folks who needed the affordability even more so, and that doesn't put anyone in a good spot.
Yep. And of course, we are seeing fewer inexpensive models available for sale in 2025 than ever before.
Mhm.
But, one thing that is not flying off the dealer lots, well, the lots, and maybe you could get a deal on, is a Cybertruck. Any takers?
You can get a great deal on a used Cybertruck. That is for sure, because they are probably moving about as quickly as a new Cybertruck. Boy, that is a tough market that nobody could have seen coming except for everyone. There was
Yeah,
a there was a frozen snowball chance in hell that Cybertruck was the new, and it was the way forward. But it turned out to be like Yeezy's sneaker line more than anything else. It was like,
that's a very
ooh,
period reference.
well, no, it's a couple years. Give me a break. It's one of those where trying to age me. It's one of those things where somebody was interested. Nope, that's about it. Yeah, somebody was interested,
Yep,
and
yep.
you'll notice that Yeezy's sneaker line, last I checked, is not currently active and full of bizarre "are those really shoes" type shoes. That's the Cybertruck. It wasn't going to happen that way. And my biggest issue, and I've said it before, apologize if it's repeating, is that you can't refresh a Cybertruck. If,
Yeah,
for example, you put out a model, they go, oh man, they really didn't take to this component or this component, and you can swap that out. You can do a bigger screen or a new nose, even if your graft is a little bit weird. There is no refreshing a Cybertruck. It is just a Cybertruck. And this is basically
yeah.
year one,
You could
you know,
reskin
there,
it.
thereabouts. You can, but again, the structure is so bizarre. I know it's not the
Yeah.
structural structure, but
You
that's
could
a
just you
lot of
could just
reworking.
wrap a you could wrap an aluminum body on it that looked more normal.
You
I
could,
mean,
you could.
obviously still expensive, but less expensive than redesigning a whole new truck, you know.
That's true. That's true.
So, apparently, according to independent reporting, sales are going down to about 5,000 units per quarter for what looks like a yearly run rate of 20,000 Cybertrucks. And that factory in Texas was apparently designed to be making 250,000 Cybertrucks a year. Somehow they thought they could pull in Ram numbers, Ram 1500 like sales numbers.
Bold is one way to put that. You know, the only way this works and turns around, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, the only way it turns around, fleet. If for some reason they can get some fleet deals out there, it's not going to be it's not going to be the most commercial fleet options because they know they need beds that do this and cabs that do that, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera. But if they can find a niche somewhere and say, hey, this is the new blank. Maybe it's just a new rental car. Maybe that's the thing. They need to get Cybertrucks out in rental fleets. I don't know. I'd
Hmm.
I'd, I'd buy a I'd rent a Cybertruck instead of buy one.
I,
Novelty, like a Jeep Wrangler.
that is a novel question, and I have not had any mental capacity spent on that. I
Hmm.
wonder if that would work. I wonder if it's too weird for the average rental car customer. Teslas Teslas are enough different, I think, than the normal rental car that a lot of rental car consumers, they didn't know necessarily take to them quite right. And of
Hmm.
course, they beat the crap out of them when they did
Yep.
rent them, as we
Yep.
discovered. I am curious to see what that would do. Tesla hasn't had a good run with rental fleets. I think it hurt
No.
them the
No.
last time they did this.
But it's not going to hurt Cybertruck sales.
That's
Can't. I
true.
mean,
That's true.
that's
There's nowhere to
that's
go.
maybe they need to start renting them from Tesla and put a screaming deal on it. At least they have some income coming in.
Hmm.
Hey, my Model 3 certainly can't go to Home Depot and load up on XYZ, but a Cybertruck could. Maybe it's the Tesla
It's
owners
true.
who come
It's
in and
true.
rent a Cybertruck for a day, or they're gonna go to a party and they want to be the weird guy with a Cybertruck. Hey, go for it. That could be an option.
You know
But
what truck I would not take to Home Depot for my Home Depot runs? A Cybertruck.
is it a Cybertruck? Okay, there are worse
um,
trucks to take. You could
there
take a
are.
Santa Cruz, and that's not going to
Yeah, I
be
wouldn't take a Santa
right.
Cruz either. I wouldn't take a Santa Cruz. I would take
So,
I would take a Maverick for small things. Though
yeah,
I think the big reason for that with the Cybertruck is I'd be too worried about damage to it.
we've got to have
That
a
would
good
be
damage waiver, and it's
expensive.
impossible to damage a Cybertruck because of its construction. We all know this.
You could still dent. I mean, yeah, you could still dent the stainless steel panels, the windows, the glass work, etc. Would be expensive to fix if you
But
bop
isn't
it
the dented
wrong.
panel a sign of toughness? And doesn't Tesla want their trucks to show off their toughness? So let them be out
Could
there. Let
be,
them be banged to hell.
could
Uh,
be.
but you know what else just got banged to hell?
Someone's sounding like a bitter Tesla stock holder.
No, that's impossible. Um, Sorry to all my friends who still work at Tesla. The tough one here, the one that really took a beating, is the newest truck in the market, and that's the Slate truck. Because
Mm-hmm.
Alex,
Mm-hmm.
I can't get my $20,000 truck anymore.
Nope. And neither will you be able to get your under $30,000 Chevy Equinox anymore,
Yep.
or
Does
your
that mean there's
really
room
screaming
now for a
Blazer
Bolt
deals.
to slip in?
Yeah. Everything is going to be more expensive to the end user there as a result. The used EV tax credit also is dead, of course, by the way. It does appear that the lease loopholes, etc., are also gone. The interesting twist here is that CAFE has effectively been killed as well, the corporate average fuel economy standard. Now, actually deleting it would require a different act of Congress. So instead, what they did was they decided that there's not going to be a CAFE fine for exceeding CAFE standards, which means Tesla is in a double dip of hurt here because over the last decades since Tesla's been around, they have raked in $10.6 billion in CAFE offset credits. So the way this works is Ford, GM, Chrysler, et cetera, whoever it is, if they don't have the average fleet fuel economy to meet the minimum standards, they can go buy credits on the open market. And these credits are obviously priced slightly less than the fine. So that way the company can save money. Otherwise, just pay the fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there is no fine, why would you buy the credits? There's no requirement to buy the credits anymore. And this means
Goodwill does
that,
not make good business.
yep,
So,
and this means millions and millions, hundreds of millions actually, of dollars a quarter that Tesla is currently raking in would not be there anymore. And if you remove those credits, it wouldn't have been a profitable company. Tesla wouldn't have been a profitable company all the way to 2021. So their profitability would have been severely delayed. And most importantly, recently, they would have had some unprofitable quarters. They would have had a financial loss first quarter of 2025 if it weren't for those cafe trades that were coming in the door.
and I promise we will not make this full Tesla episode. It's just obviously hit pretty hard by this change in,
Mm-hmm.
in Cybertrucks. But Alex, it's all okay because they all drive themselves now, and Tesla can go ahead and make money where I can't yet, apparently. and they don't need staff anymore because they can drive themselves to their drop-off locations. So don't worry, change is coming. They have thought this thing out. It's just flip the switch and ready to make it happen.
Someone's sounding bitter again. Don't know why that is there.
No,
Someone
no.
sounding bitter.
The good news is Tesla
Hmm.
doesn't send us any vehicles. They never
Did
have. They never will. So,
did uh did Elon kick you off his Christmas card list or?
oh goodness, I don't check my mail, so it'd be hard to say.
Anyway, this does tie into another interesting side note here, which is the likelihood that we will probably see different blends of engines coming forward. Because if there are no statutory requirements for corporate average fuel economy to go up,
Hmm.
guess what happens? Fuel economy historically in the United States has stagnated, or probably we're going to see a actual unwinding of some of these fuel economy levels that we see now. Why would we bother having a Chevy truck lineup with brand new, more fuel efficient engines when you can just keep selling the old ones? Why bother doing, inline six fuel efficient
Hmm.
engines in most of the trims of Ram 1500 when you could just double down on that Hemi that's been resurrected and bring back a TRX, etc. The
Yeah.
downside to this, obviously, though, is cost to the consumer, because the less efficient your vehicle is, the more it's going to cost you to run long term. And we're not talking small amounts here. I actually had a part of an upcoming episode, if you guys haven't seen it on the YouTube channel here, is that we're going to be talking about resale value and its impact on your pocketbook. Key finding here, basically, resale value is a whole lot less important, I think, than a lot of people realize, number one. But number two, you can have a vehicle with quote unquote poor resale value that still costs you less over its lifetime than a close competitor that has high resale value, because the fuel cost difference can be quite large. So, oddly enough, one of the vehicles that we were talking about, and I hadn't thought about this when we were going into it because I assumed the fuel economy was actually a lot closer than it really was. We're looking at lifetime cost, 5 years, of a Grand Cherokee versus a 4Runner, one vehicle that has classically high reliability and high resale value versus the Jeep, shall we say. And
The Grand
oddly
Cherokee
enough,
in the room.
yeah, oddly enough, when you really look at that number, the Grand Cherokee would actually cost you nearly $10,000 less to keep around than the
Over the course
4Runner,
of,
5 years.
okay,
So,
that
you
adds
know,
up.
yeah, it adds up quite a lot. And that's not just fuel economy. There's also the
Right.
reality that you get a huge discount cash on the hood of the Grand Cherokee. So it drops its actual cash out the door price lower than a comparable 4Runner. But the big thing is, according to Edmunds TCO numbers, which, everybody can comment how they feel about that in the comment section, but I quite like Edmunds slicing and dicing there.
Hmm.
It's estimated that you'd only spend about $700 more on maintenance and repairs on the Grand Cherokee over 5 years than the 4Runner.
Hmm. And if that was something you were worried about, you could probably get some warranty coverage to cover
Yep.
a greater portion of that.
And not that this is going to turn into a Edmunds is fantastic thing, but I do think that Edmunds' total cost of ownership scores on vehicles that they have those scores for are really useful for buyers to compare vehicle A to vehicle B with. The
Hmm.
one thing I would say is, don't look at their depreciation numbers with and treat them as gospel, because your situation is going to be different, which is what we dive into in that video. I'm not going to try and rehash it here too much, but in a nutshell, when they're talking about depreciation, when anybody's talking about resale value, like if you see, Lexus has highest ALG resale value in the industry, or this has the highest resale value, whatever, remember that this is MSRP versus worth after 5 years, value after 3 years, after 5 years, depending on the window we're talking about here, not actual transaction price. And some brands sell well above MSRP, some brands sell well below MSRP. And so where your transaction price actually rides is going to really impact that quote unquote resale value score. But when you actually look at what you paid for the car versus what it's worth after that time period, you'll notice that the gap really starts narrowing. the Forerunner still should be more valuable after its 5-year window than the Grand Cherokee. But the difference is a lot closer when you factor in the fact that the average Grand Cherokee is 10% off at least. My
Yeah.
local dealer has $8,000 on the hood of a Grand Cherokee Limited right now. So we're talking pretty big deals.
Yeah.
The
It's a few
opposite
car
is also
payments.
yeah, the opposite is also true though. So like if you were one of those people that bought a Kia Telluride riding high going, "Hey, it has 80% resale value." Well, part of the reason the resale value was so high back when it launched was people were paying $10,000, $15,000 markups on that Telluride. And I'm sorry, if you bought a $75,000 Telluride, you really don't want to know what its value is now because it is not 55% like a Honda Pilot is.
You're gonna
It's
wish you bought a Cybertruck.
you're gonna wish you bought anything else because when you're paying over MSRP for anything hot, Maverick, Bronco Sport for a while, Bronco. Actually, Ford's been guilty of some of this for a while.
You're about to
Um,
start listing off Fords.
I just lifted off Fords. I didn't mean to, but Ford dealers. It's not Ford because Ford's really trying not to, but Ford dealers. Whew, some of those dealers.
Supras,
Anyway,
Type R's, those sorts of
yeah.
things.
And Kia dealers, because until recently, Kia had the highest percentage over MSRP of any brand as far as actual transaction price goes.
Wow.
But the point is that if every car is going to depreciate, say, at least 50% over 5 years, if you had to pay $10,000 for the honor of getting that car, but it's still going to depreciate versus MSRP 50%, your actual resale value is in the toilet because
Yeah.
add the 10 grand, add
So
all of
you
your
literally
dealer
just
markup.
flushed $10,000.
Yeah, just go
And if
buy
you
the
want
something
to,
else.
that's fine, right? Like do your thing, but just know that
Oh,
calculation.
yeah. I love
Yeah.
the Kia Telluride. I think it is still, even though it is aging and we're going to see a new one soon, I still think it is one of the best 3-row SUVs in that segment, but it is absolutely not worth a penny over MSRP.
The
That's my personal philosophy.
it's well, nothing should be more than MSRP, right?
Exactly.
Unless it's a very limited allocation of something very, very special. That's where I can say, hey, listen, what percentage are we talking about? But you still don't want to do it, and especially if you're going to rotate your cars frequently, it's just not worth it. There's a COVID story that keeps popping in my head. It's the woman who spent $90,000 on a Rav4 Prime, and I go, you still bought a Toyota Rav4. What in the world are we doing here?
And if you need to sell it in 5 years, guess what? It's not going to be worth any more than the person that bought a Rav4 Prime at MSRP. And that's the
Yep.
core problem with resale value. I will say Jeep Wrangler is another, is actually probably the prime example of this because Wrangler has historically sold well over MSRP for a lot of different reasons,
Yep.
most of which have to do with accessories added on to the Wrangler. So if you're going to your Jeep dealer and there's a dealer markup on it, find another dealer. But if there are a lot of accessories on it that you don't really want, just remember that
Pre-installed. Second
you're
steer.
not going to get that money back.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that Wrangler has a really high resale value is that, again, over MSRP. So if you roll in and you buy a $40,000 Wrangler for $50,000 because it's got roof racks and this and that and whatever and winches and blah, blah, blah on it, all these Mopar accessories, $10,000 worth of Mopar accessories, it might be worth something more than the $40,000 Wrangler next to it that is at MSRP, but it's not going to be worth $10,000 more when you go sell it.
And your accessories and packages are going to depreciate differently than the vehicle is
Mm-hmm.
also, because guess what? Yes, I wanted your Wrangler Rubicon. I did not want
Mm-hmm.
these additional options. And just
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't have the patience to say no, I do. You know, like
Right.
that's the challenge there. Here's my
Mm-hmm.
question. Is there a world right now where the market is going to be favorable to used EVs because without that federal tax credit, it basically cuts into the artificial
Mm-hmm.
depreciation of them?
And that is an interesting question that we don't have an answer to, but we are sure going to find out over the next, I would say, 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be surprised if we are in the very unfortunate world for business where we are flip-flopping between regimes, and that sounds like a bad word, where we are flip-flopping between standards and goals as a society. If the
Mhm.
next administration comes in and puts back the tax credit, which I would sort of support, I think it should be more means tested than it is now, but that's a whole different problem. But if they
Mhm.
pop back on a tax credit, especially on used EVs, etc., and then the next administration takes it off again, and then the next one puts it back on, real shortly, you're going to see car companies say, never mind, we're not interested because we can't plan. It takes way
Yep.
too long to plan a new car, and factories and everything that goes into building a new model, let alone a new model on a new technology. For car companies to be willing to risk this kind of rapid changing.
Right. Now, my other question here is, because cafe is again effectively neutered, is there a market now for those small trucks that we couldn't have because of those different standards?
It is possible. That is actually an interesting question that I had pondered, and it's uncertain. The bigger problem for those small trucks has historically been the chicken tax, the so-called chicken tax, historically related to chicken exports to Europe. But long story short, small trucks, well, light trucks, anything in that category that is
Pickups of
coming
the sort.
from, right, pickups, the El Camino style vehicles, because the Subaru Brat was
The
included,
Utes.
etc.,
Hmm.
cargo vans, that entire category. Any of those vehicles that are coming from outside North America have a 27% tariff on them. So if that tariff, and this administration loves tariffs, so the chances of it disappearing, pretty damn small, right?
We don't remove tariffs here. That's not how
But
this that's
but
how this works.
if they could disappear, then not having cafe fines would allow all these cute little Brazilian Chevy Montanas and things to come to the US, which I think would be adorable. Do they meet American crash standards? No. They probably would still have to be redesigned for our market in some small form at least.
And
Um,
we're talking about product cycles. I mean, this would be a brand new
yeah,
product, so it would take a long time to spin up. But
it'd take a
I got
while.
to get something out of this,
Yeah.
Not like it's not exciting to have some really cool engines start working their way
Hmm.
back into some vehicles. I get that; it's not a problem. But come on, give me something to celebrate.
Yeah, homologation costs are still expensive, so I don't know if
Mhm.
that would change too much. I
Yeah.
would assume that the biggest beneficiary to this is going to be lifetime extensions of engines that were probably borderline on cafe standards.
Mhm.
The Stellantis group of companies is probably going to just dive back into bigger engines as long as the factory components are still working, because they were the ones that were paying the most fines anyway.
Yeah.
The German car company is probably going to just keep rolling on the big engines because they have also historically paid some pretty large fines in the United States. So that's probably the bigger impact there. It does not appear that there's going to be any rolling back of Toyota's direction of pushing hybrids and everything,
They're
because
too
for
far in on
yeah,
that.
they're too far in, and I think they have a strong customer demand for it. That customer set that's interested in a Toyota is also interested in hybrids, and it's a more developed technology that buyers are more comfortable with as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, it's just like I said, it's a changing landscape. I'm curious. Like, I'd love to see the trucks, but I know that would be many years out. And to your point, we should not be doing those projections. Short term, selfishly, I hope that the EV prices start to climb because of that negative, or the lack there of artificial depreciation. But that's not going to be quick. So, good news, I don't need to sell my car today.
Yes. But we could talk about buying out a lease. So why don't you dive into our viewer question? This one comes from another Alex.
Yes. And it says, "Hi, Alex," and then in parentheses, "and team." That's us. Thank you
That's
for
you.
noticing.
Hi, team.
Yeah. Back in May, I leased an EX30 after seeing your content and learning of the ability to buy out the lease, including the $7,500 credit from Volvo. I jumped on the opportunity to buy one where I live, which is St. Louis, Missouri, knowing that availability in these deals were shaky due to tariffs and the chaotic car market. That was the right move if that's still what you enjoy. So far, I've been loving the car, so I wanted to ask if you have gone through the process of buying out yours and any tips or tricks for doing so. The dealer told me they could help me if I wanted, but I I'd like to look into options on my own. Thank you. Alex, did you buy out your lease?
Well, first I would say, hey, Volvo, you racked up a sale. So, send your commission this away, or at least invite us
To the team.
to a drive for the new S90 replacement, because I am curious about that one. At any rate,
And I'm available.
EX30. Yeah, EX30. No, we haven't bought out the lease, and I do not know if we will or won't on that car. It sort of depends on how it still is fitting the use for the company when the Blazers lease is up, and how the vibes are going, for lack of a better thought process
This
there.
is a vibe-based decision-making
It's a
process.
vibe-based decision because let's just say child seats don't fit in the EX30 with me driving, so that's a
Right.
problem.
Right.
No long-term use case there for that guy. On the buying out of the lease with the Volvo, the key thing would be, what is the interest rate on the lease, the money factor. So if you look at it and you look at the payments and the buyout percentage, you can calculate how much that lease is costing you to keep around for that period of time. If the effective interest rate is fairly low, and most economists would say, not to step on anybody's toes, but the cost of money is currently 2 to 3%, something like that a year. So if the effective interest is over 3%, theoretically, it might be worth buying the lease out, unless that money could do something else for you at a higher interest rate somewhere else. If you do choose to buy it out, you can actually just go direct with Volvo Financial. So you just call them up and say, hey, I want to buy out the lease, get a lease buyout quote. You send them a check and they send you the title. It's actually a really, really simple process. Remember that the car will be retitled in your name. So you probably, depending on the state, may have to pay retitling fees depending on where you are and exactly how the laws work in your area. My recollection, for instance, in California, is that you will have to pay sales tax on that whole amount because you're now buying it. When you
Mhm.
didn't before at the lease, because you weren't buying it, your sales tax is wrapped into the lease payment. So if your state charges sales tax on a car, you'd have to pay that. Some states may require that you redo your license and the associated property tax fees with it. That's a tricky one. So you may want to align it with the end of the calendar year so you don't double pay, that sort of thing, or the end of your registration year, I should say, not the calendar year. But it kind of depends. So you might want to look and see what Missouri wants to do for you.
The other thing there is that I think the question is, if you choose to buy it out, like what does that process look like? And it's like buying any other vehicle, right? So Volvo
Mm-hmm.
Financial will have all the information, your buyout costs, here's what this looks like. And then if you go to the dealer, like it said, the dealer will help you out. They will help you out because they are incentivized to sell a financial product. It doesn't mean you're going to get the best deal there, but also it's going
Mm-hmm.
to be easier to go to them and say, hey, can you shop a rate for me? Because they generally have more access to offers than you do. And honestly, right now interest rates are still not great. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the non-incentivized rates are at the moment, but it can't be under 5 or 6% right now. I don't think so. That's something to probably just keep in mind. I think Alex, you're probably looking that up right now, but that's the thing. Feel free to shop your bank, go to them, ask them. My bank has a calculator online. It says, hey, here's your window. And I assume it's
Mm-hmm.
based on your credit score, blah, blah, blah. So that's what you go into the dealer and say, hey, can you beat
Mm-hmm.
this? If they can, go with the dealer. I have no loyalty to any bank at any point when it comes to paying a loan. I do not
Yep.
care. Can I pay it online? I can. Excellent.
Yeah.
Give me the best rate.
Just remember, you will be buying a used car, and so you'd have to be looking at used car rates for that,
Yes.
because that is what a lease will be. So those rates are not going to be as good as if you had purchased it with a factory arrangement there, factory financing arrangement. So that's where you have to kind of balance those out and really determine what that interest rate is on your lease. Let's move on, because Travis, we have some 5-star reviews. We have 4 of them.
This says best sort out there, 5 stars. Alex, Travis, and crew are the best, and my personal favorites for automotive information and news out there. Shopping for my first electric vehicle, their content was tremendously helpful in my research and making a decision. Other outlets ragged on the RZ as the worst option in the class due to its range, But listening to Alex and team helped me analyze my use case and realize it fit my needs perfectly. I love it and haven't looked back. That one is from Jeremy. So thank you very much. That Lexus RZ is an interesting one because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, on paper, it falls short of a lot of different offers, a lot of different models in different ways. But if you don't need max range or max charging, it's still a really nice car to drive. And especially if
Yeah.
you can get a good deal on it.
Now, I personally would have Genesis GV70'd,
Okay.
but GV70 EV'd, electrified, whatever they call
Electrified
that thing.
GB70.
Stupidest name in the biz. But at any rate, I probably
Yes.
would have gone that direction, but I think that it's often lampooned for the exact same reason, which is its range is not overly rangy. But
Mm.
most people don't need as much range as they think.
Yeah. I mean, don't say that too loud. People are listening. But yeah,
Yeah.
100%. No, so I'm so glad we could help on that one.
Mm-hmm.
This next one, excellent resource and entertainment. My goodness, we are moving on up. This is Alex and Travis are phenomenal hosts. Their knowledge and clear explanations, of how the industry operates have saved my partner and me. I can read countless hours researching for both new and used vehicles. I've been watching the main channel since early 2020, and this podcast has been an excellent addition. Thank you for all the work both of you and your team do.
Aw.
Excellent.
Well,
And then
thanks,
I have
Jenna.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad we could help you and your partner because car shopping is not always fun. It should be. It should be. It's exciting and dealers ruin it. And it's hard to figure out what's going on. So glad you listened in. This one coming in from Josh says, so good. I really enjoy listening to the podcast. Just bought a new vehicle and these guys gave me so much good advice. Thank you. And finally, from Opera Guy 42, top notch resource, obviously a man of style and fashion, simply one of the internet's best resources and guides to automotive design, technology, and engineering. Thoughtful, intelligent, and candid appraisals of the multitude of transportation options available to the majority of consumers today. I'll tell you what, Opera Guy, we try. We really do.
That's so much better than one of the YouTube comments I read today, which was that I look like John Oliver with no personality. So
I think there's a shirt about personality. Don't we have one of those available on
there's something along
AOAmerch.com?
like this. Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
I have to admit, I've received a few comments myself. Some of them can be entertaining. Some of them are a little bit less so. But early on, jumping into the world of YouTube is an interesting thing to jump into. I got a comment that said, "This guy has the personality of a Nissan Leaf," and I
aw.
don't think he meant fun and quirky.
So a little
But
sluggish,
like
you charge
Nissan,
slowly?
that's true. That is really true. But like the Nissan Leaf, I have survived.
Is your touchscreen just a little smaller than the competition's?
That's an inappropriate question for public.
I don't know what you're referring to. Let's talk about your phone there, buddy.
This is the entertainment factor, and this is why everyone tunes in, obviously.
Serial hybrids are a problem. That
Oh,
was
this
an
again.
elegant segue.
This again. Alex, you're always on this. You pick my favorite systems and go, you should not like them at all.
Nissan recently said, though, that they are redesigning a hybrid system just for us in North America. So, hey, this kind
Okay,
of highlights. And
that
this
would
week
be
we
good.
happen to have a Outlander non-plug-in hybrid in for review.
Mhm.
For viewers that remember, we actually owned an Outlander plug-in hybrid for a year. Now the non-plug-in just in for a week, and it's already averaging way better fuel economy than the Outlander ever managed on its own.
Yes, the plug-in hybrid, and obviously it's carrying some different systems and different weight. I too have a non-Outlander plug-in hybrid in my driveway, but that one's called a Range Rover Sport, and it is the plug-in hybrid. Very very different setups though, and
Mm-hmm,
I spent a
mm-hmm.
lot of time with that Outlander myself. I had it here at my place. It was quite a drive. Maybe not the best long-term road trip car. Same city and same highway, but if you plug it in, you are mostly going to drive on EV. And for me,
Yeah,
that's the argument that the fuel economy drop is not as important as it may seem on paper.
right. It's not the worst, but this is more of a case in point. I think this highlights exactly why Nissan has said that they're not bringing their e-power system to the US, because if people are listening to this outside the US, they're thinking, hang on, Nissan's got a lot of hybrids. And they
Mhm.
do in a lot of markets. In fact, I was recently in Bogota for 6 weeks, and there were Rogue e-power hybrids everywhere. I actually think they might have been X-Trail e-Powers, however they label them there in that
Mhm.
market, but very clearly a Nissan Rogue e-Power hybrid. And the reason that they gave is exactly the reason that we've commented on before, which is Nissan said that their highway fuel economy, especially higher speed highway fuel economy, they thought was too low for North American consumers. And we spend so much more time at those sustained higher highway speeds than other parts of the world do, that they thought it was a bad fit for our market.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that in your commercial, you can't say really great on fuel economy except for this situation, which you'll often find yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just not a great way to sell it. And again, if I was sitting down with somebody and making an argument for, let's talk about your use case and whether this does or doesn't make sense, and here's why it's actually beneficial, someone's going to look at that number and go, but it's smaller, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Alex, I was watching our YouTube channel, as happens on occasion, and there was a video you put out talking about reliability. And it turns out in our comment section, that is one of the top comments all the time is, how reliable
Mm-hmm.
is this car going to be? And my crystal ball has never worked particularly well in these situations. It's kind of a best guess game, but the data that we have that says, here's how reliable a vehicle is not always as clear as it seems. And I think that video, if folks haven't watched it, please go check it out because it's pretty enlightening.
Yeah, we take a deep dive basically into Consumer Reports numbers. But before I talk about that, did you remember to hit the like button and the bell icon and
Of
subscribe and
course I did.
notify? And
Alex,
yeah.
you know I've been a subscriber for many years.
Okay, there we go. But is your notification bell icon on?
Absolutely not. I don't need to see more of your face on my phone. Are you kidding me?
At bell notification.
Yeah,
Notification,
but
everybody.
or my
Everybody.
own face. I don't need my own face on my own phone. But yeah,
Everybody needs.
it still happens.
We depend on that bell being on to be
No.
notified of all of our videos. At any rate, yes. Um, the impetus of this was, of course, JD Power releasing one of their studies, IQS. And the reality that whenever we talk about this with our viewers, or viewers write in, say, why don't you talk about reliability? The long and short of it is that in North America, we do not know as much about comparative reliability as people think, and certainly as I think you and I might both like. For instance, how reliable is a Dodge Charger versus a Toyota Camry? Have no idea. Really have never known. How reliable are some of the hotter selling crossovers in the small crossover segment versus some of the newer entries? We just don't have any information. And the reason here is that nobody's doing the kind of large scale surveys that would give us this info in a usable fashion. Consumer Reports does a member-based survey. They were the ones that we talked about mostly in that episode. But if you're doing a membership survey, then you can only count the pool of vehicles that your members own. Consumer Reports has been shrinking membership-wise, and their survey pool has shrunk dramatically over the last few years. So now it's down to about 300,000 cars spread over 25 model years. It's a really big spread there. Not talking about huge databases.
Right.
And their cars largely center, the ones in that pool largely are cars that Consumer Reports type members would be interested in. So Toyotas and Hondas and Hyundais and Kias, etc.
That Range Rover in the driveway and
Not
the
in there. Yep,
Raptor and
not in there. Exactly.
no? Okay.
Exactly. So, huge holes in the data. Like Cadillac, there's very little data on anything but two models, and they're not even the best-selling Cadillac, which is an oddity.
Mhm.
There is no data on a lot of the Stellantis portfolio because those customers seemingly look at Stellantis, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, etc., and go, "Oh, they're unreliable. I wouldn't buy them." So then we don't have any data on them.
Mhm.
And this is not just a Consumer Reports problem, because then we have JD Power, which is not truly a reliability report. I think this is probably the most misunderstood thing in the consumer world on the industry.
Mhm.
JD Power's business model is not to provide free rankings to you and me. JD Power's business model is to survey customers about their vehicle within certain timeframes, gather and crunch that data, and then sell that data to car companies so they can try and build a better product. It's not really made for you and me to go, Camry is more reliable than Accord, or this is more reliable than that, because not only is the score not pure reliability, there's functionality, there's driving dynamics in there. I would argue, even though I have been slapped on the wrist for saying this by some people, that there is an air of customer satisfaction, especially in the IQS survey of JD Power. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with these two, but maybe you can explain to everybody the difference between IQS and VDS with JD Power.
Honestly, I don't know the difference by their terminology. No.
So this is a good example then.
Yeah.
So VDS, the Vehicle Dependability Study, which is
Mm.
the closer one to reliability, this one is looking at vehicles sold 3 years ago in their third year of life. So the
Right.
2025 VDS is on 2022 model year vehicles, and only what happened in the third year. So if we throw Ram under the bus, sorry Ram, I love you, but if your engine caught on fire in the first year and your transmission fell out the second year, but nothing went wrong in the third year, golden, right? That's the problem with this particular score, because it's looking just at 1 year. But it's also looking at things that are not truly reliability issues.
See,
So,
that was what I was going to ask you is what do
yeah,
you think reliability is?
and that
If
is the
a
tricky part.
window switch goes out on your car, is that the
Yes.
brand's reliability?
Well, that's a reliability problem, I would say, for
It,
sure.
it is, but in my head, I go, that's the part reliability. Is it the brand
Mhm.
reliability? And is that part covered under warranty? And does it get
Yeah.
replaced? And then, yes, inconvenient, but I'm not too worried about it because
Mhm.
chances are, in that case, a manufacturing defect versus a very faulty item on,
Mhm.
by and
Mhm.
large. Uh, but some people are going to be really understanding of those things, and some people are
Yep.
absolutely not.
And you're depending on the survey respondent to remember that, and part of that is care, right? So
Mhm.
remembering it is did I care about it? Was it inconvenience enough, or did I forget about it because I just don't care, right?
Mhm.
So there are always going to be those variances in the data like that. But I would say window switches breaking, absolutely a reliability problem. Is Android Auto not working when you bought a new Android phone or you got an Android software update? Is Android Auto not connecting a problem? Is that reliability?
I say yes because I have way too many issues with Android Auto, but that's not a reason to switch to Apple. So we're
But
back to that. But
but
yeah,
here is the question.
it's not.
Is
Is it the
that
car's fault or is it my phone's fault?
exactly? Or is it your cable's fault?
Hmm.
These are all unanswered questions because theoretically, the software stack on the display device for smartphone projection, be it Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, is supposed to be static. That is supposedly set in stone years ago, and all the new devices just function to that same software standard, interface standard. Because really, it's just transmitting the image processed by the phone, created by the phone, to the display, and transmitting touch signals back to the device that's connected to it. So one would hope, at least, that the problem is really in your smartphone. But of course, you're going to blame the car because your smartphone worked the rest of the time, and
My
this is the
phone, my
one
phone
time,
works and the
right?
car isn't. Yep.
And so those scores are also included in this. There's a measure of drivability. Do people like the way that it drives and handles and whatever? There's a measure of that in these scores as well. And what doesn't help JD Power out is that they then calculate and tabulate these out as problems per 100 vehicles. Well, again, though, is drivability, liking it, not liking it, a problem? Is your car phone, or is your CarPlay a problem? you know your infotainment system rebooting randomly, that's a problem. Is
Yep.
CarPlay connecting? That's a tricky one. The world of Bluetooth, that used to be the start of this, was does
Mhm.
Bluetooth work, does your phone connect, etc. That's kind of the origin story of this whole infotainment section, and it's
That's
gained
that's the
larger
that's the
prominence.
it's the UI developers villain era. Like that's where it
Hmm.
kicks in because something is now completely out of your control,
Yeah.
and your product is going to be blamed for the end result.
And it does appear that because of the way that infotainment operations and interactions have been included in some of these quote unquote reliability numbers, that that is part of why cars look like they're less reliable than they were before. And
Mhm.
I would argue that this is probably also part of why some of the electric only brands are scoring the way they are, because their software changes more rapidly thanks to their particular desire to do over the updates very regularly. This
Yep.
can introduce more software related errors. And that's where that traditional reliability question just it's more of a personal preference than ever before, because previously window switch breaks, car won't turn on, obviously a
Mhm.
reliability problem, right?
Yep.
But if we're talking about your Bel Air, the radio was real simple. Radio died, doesn't turn on, yes, problem.
Mhm.
It didn't have all the things that we get now.
Right.
So many more areas there for the consumer to be maybe uneducated or just not concerned about. And that's where that interoperability question comes into play.
And
Now,
it's a huge benefit to people who are on board and can be patient and say, "Hey, this
mhm,
is fine," but that's not everyone. And the survey goes to
mhm,
everyone. They don't get to weed that out before they get there. Now, ironically, I just got an email from Tesla letting me know, heads up, that federal tax credit's going away. So I just want to make sure
yep.
everyone knows. But
And if
but
we if
but my favorite part of these surveys, my favorite award is the initial quality. That is
mhm,
my
yep,
absolute favorite
that's the
because what
IQS.
okay, yep. So what does that mean to you? And is everything you love right now, how is that going
Yeah.
to age? And I don't mean how is it going to wear and break down. I mean, do you still like it weeks,
Mhm.
months, years later?
Yeah.
Because what could be fun and cute becomes really annoying pretty quickly.
And that is the one that is the most misunderstood, I would say, is this IQS, because they do call it quality. And I kind of am okay with that term. At least they're not calling it reliability or dependability, etc.
Right.
But this is a very different survey. This is a survey meant to be taken after you've owned your car for 90 days. And honestly, the likelihood of you having an actual mechanical problem in 90 days with a modern car is extraordinarily low. So this survey tends to be even more qualitative than the other, in that it's factoring in more dealer experience, more infotainment experience, more drivability questions. How do you like this? How do you like that? This really is more of a customer satisfaction ranking, which is
Mhm.
why sometimes these numbers will really flip flop depending on what manufacturers are doing to try and make their customers more engaged, happier, explanations at the dealer. Manufacturer programs where dealers are required to or encouraged to explain features, pair your smartphone, answer questions, have simpler infotainment systems on their vehicles. These sorts of programs can really juice up the IQS numbers, because people get in the car and they're happier with it.
But it costs money to do that, and that's where things get tough. So you see that hands-on experience. You have the product experts. They're
Mhm.
working at a dealership who have nothing to do with the sale of the vehicle. Their job is just to educate you on your new car. You see that at luxury dealers. You don't see that at Chevrolet
Mhm.
because you got to
Yep.
pay somebody to do that, and that person is not actually making you, the dealer, any money. Honestly, I think it's very short-sighted. It would behoove a system like that
Mhm.
to be employed by Chevrolet and be placed within a dealership. And
Yep.
that's something that could go ahead and help increase that. But I'll tell you what, that Range Rover I have out front, that interface is really neat, but it takes time to learn it and figure
Does
out
take
where
time.
things are at and
Yep.
how you want to interact with it. And I know a lot of people who are buying that vehicle do not have the technical know-how from the jump,
Mhm.
and they don't have the patience, and they have better have somebody available to tell them what's going on, or they're going to hate it. I think
Mhm.
it's a fantastic system once you figure it out. And you and I figure out a lot of systems every week. But if that
Yep.
doesn't happen, someone's going to go, I hate this. And how many people have you talked to, you and I working in the car world, who say, oh, I don't know how to blank. And you and I know at least roughly where it is buried in their infotainment. And you go, click, 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 here you go. And they go, oh my God, that changed my ownership experience because
Yep.
now all my
Mhm.
doors unlock when I park or my lights stay on. I
Mhm.
feel safer. It's like, Yeah, that's a huge impact on how much you enjoy your car, knowing what the feature
Mm-hmm.
set is. But it's a big list of things available
Yep.
these days.
And this is why internal surveys and JD Power surveys, et cetera, are the reason why, regardless of what kind of car you buy, that sales guy's always going to try and be like, well, can I help you pair your phone? And can I help you do this? And this is where this is. And sometimes they don't know what they're doing, but they're going through the motions because they know it's going to be surveyed later. And so
And
they're
they are
doing this.
incentivized.
Right, and they're incentivized, obviously, right, for all of this. But the bottom line with JD Power is no, the awards are not bought. There's this whole online conspiracy theory that awards only go to companies that pay JD Power, and that's why cars get the awards. Toyota's spending a lot of money, let's put it that way, if that's the case. But no, every car company except Tesla, apparently, and Rivian seem to buy the bulk JD Power data because they want to know what customers are saying about their car. And
Yeah.
that's part of why you see these numbers changing around because the car companies are trying to address customer complaints, etc. The main thing is remember that you are not the end consumer, the target customer for JD Power data. You're sort of an ancillary thing. The car companies are the ones that are targeted by JD Power for the data. They're surveying to gather the data to sell the data to the car companies so those car companies can see what's going on with their own quality control because they know the VIN number of the vehicle, they know who it is, etc. They can be like, oh, is there a collective problem with this run of cars, or is that why we're getting a squeak here or whatever there? So they're doing their own internal work using JD Power as an external resource. But what I do like about JD Power's data, and I wish they could use in a format that focused strictly on mechanical reliability, eh, with a little bit of maybe just like radio turn on, turn off, like failure functionality, but mostly on mechanical reliability so we could actually get good data here, would be because their survey is casting a really wide net. When you look at Consumer Reports data, it has enormous gaps. There are more than 20 brands that have no data at all on the Consumer Reports survey. More than half of the Mercedes lineup, almost the entire Cadillac lineup is missing. Huge numbers of American vehicles are missing from their data set. That doesn't happen with JD Power because JD Power uses registration data in all 50 states, and they mail surveys out to registered owners of these vehicles and then ask them. They also give them a buck. Hey, thanks for filling out our survey. Here's
Mhm.
$1. That's the classic JD Power thing. And that's how they get their data. So they can make sure they cast a really big, really anonymous, widespread net, not just the customers that are subscribing to a magazine. Now, it doesn't really seem to affect the brand rankings, and this should tell you that JD Power is mostly on the up and up, if not completely on the up and up. I have no insight into their operation, mind you, that's why I'm
Sure.
saying it that way. But, JD Power and Consumer Reports both put Toyota at the top. Like, hello, Toyota Lexus always at the top for the actual reliability dependability studies. So, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a surprise. It's
Unless
important for people to understand how the data comes.
unless Toyota's spending a whole lot more money than we think they are.
Yeah, they don't have the budget for that.
And they're not. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
not.
it's not. Yeah, it's the discrepancies that people dislike and point out to are easily explained away by talking about what the data is actually saying, not what people want it to be, because
And
neither one
yeah.
of those numbers is purely mechanical reliability, which is what
And the
people
thing
really
is,
seem to want.
I understand what everyone's looking for. I would love to give that to you. I don't
Mhm.
have it. We don't have the
Yeah.
user base. And even if we did, if we
Mhm.
put out this survey to all of our subscribers on YouTube, well, even our two channels are going to get two very different answers, right? From
Yeah.
Auto Buyer's Guide to EV Buyer's Guide to our
Yeah.
podcast consumers. They're going to fall into these different funnels of like, this is the kind of vehicle they like, and this is the kind of, and if you do us versus, our friends over at TFL or Redline Reviews, and then compared to like Whistling Diesel, we're getting tons of different data. You can
Mhm.
only report on what you have, but
Right.
it's tough to get a hold of this much.
Yeah. My bottom line here would be I would also dissuade people from doing the whole, oh, I go to forums and I see X. Well, that's where problems go to die. No one goes to a forum other than certain hardcore enthusiasts of certain models, no Camry owner is going to a forum just to talk about how perfect their Camry has been and report every 10,000 miles about how perfect their Camry has been, right?
Mhm.
No one's doing that. So all you're seeing on forums, by and large, especially like Reddits and things like that, is like, I have a problem. Has anybody else had this problem? How do I fix this problem? It's a very great resource. It's just
It
not
is.
a good resource to know how common a problem is. You can see the kinds of problems cars can have that way, but you
Mhm.
cannot tell their frequency by
And you're
any
always going to
stretch.
see somebody else who had that problem.
Hmm.
That's why they're on
That's
the
why they're
forum
there.
looking for the same thing.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean it's widespread. It means that it's
Hmm.
not a one of one. And you're like,
Right.
oh, there were 100. Okay,
Like,
fair. How many people bought this car last year? Like that's
exactly.
yeah. I would
Like,
love for it to just be the answer, but gosh, it's
yeah.
just not that simple.
Likewise, remember that mechanics are like cardiologists. You go, this maybe it's the first time that's been said. Good for mechanics, right? You go to a mechanic because you have a problem or you're getting your car serviced. But a lot of people just go to sort of the Jiffy Lube thing, and you only go to the mechanic when your car has a problem. Well, you go to the cardiologist when you have a heart problem, right? So all the cardiologist is going to see is people with heart problems. The mechanic at the transmission shop is only going to see the transmissions that failed. They don't see the transmissions that haven't failed. So,
Can you please tell me how wonderfully squeaky clean my transmission is, please?
right.
Here's the money.
Exactly. This is again a situation of they can tell you the kind of problems that occur, but they
Mhm.
don't have the data on the frequency of problems because they're not seeing all the cars that don't have the problem. And that's the problem that we find ourselves in when we're talking about reliability. The one place where we could get some of this data is aftermarket warranty companies, but good luck trying to get an aftermarket warranty quote on a whole bunch of different vehicles without having your phone and your email blow up, because you got to give them your phone number and your email address, and then you
And
just
that's getting
can.
sold to everything.
Don't do it. Don't do Loan Depot. Don't do extended car warranty things. It will never end.
Yeah.
You will want to throw your phone in the sea and buy a new number.
Do you
That's how
think
that's
it's
going to go
bad when
down.
you don't, or when you're not shopping for an extended warranty?
Yes.
Imagine when you are.
Change your name, move to a different country. That's how you escape the extended
You
warranty
are
people.
dead now.
But but that data is useful. And this is again, an unsolicited plug for Edmunds. Edmunds true cost to own data is attempting to use that kind of data for their maintenance number. So FYI, that's where that maintenance number comes from.
Mhm.
So, or sorry, repairs number, I should say, not the maintenance number. So the repairs number, they're using third-party warranty data. They're attempting to extract profit margins from that. I don't know how accurate that is. I cannot speak to the accuracy of that number, but it more or less looks right. For instance, in the Grand Cherokee 4Runner example that we were talking about, 4Runner estimate for repairs, Grand Cherokee to 4Runner similar priced. It's about $700 more for repairs for 5 years on the Grand Cherokee. Maintenance numbers practically identical between these two vehicles. And that's logical because if we're looking at that comparison, the Grand Cherokee has more mechanically on it. It's got an air
Mhm.
suspension, it's got lockers available up front, disconnectable sway bars depending on the model and the year we're talking about. Just more stuff on it than you could ever get in a 4Runner. So it should cost more to warrant over that time period. But I would caution folks on this because we did have one commenter that asked this question. If you're looking at this going, well, but my off-road vehicle's extended warranty is X and my luxury car's extended warranty is Y, but they cost the same, just remember that these are not an appropriate comparison for that kind of cost because mechanically they're not the same kind of vehicle. So your off-roader is going to have a different different use case, especially different potential use case off-roading. So the likelihood of repair is going to be higher.
And don't forget that there's a lot of things that can void those warranties. And if your
Mm-hmm.
off-roader has a warranty, off-roading it might 100% void your warranty, depending on what it is that went wrong. So
Yeah.
there are devils in the details, folks.
Yep. So as always, hit that subscribe button. Be sure and send us your voice memos. You can email them to hey@autobuyersguide.com. You can call us at 669-842-1947. It's been a while since we've had a phone call, hasn't it?
It has. Should I call in and just see how that goes?
I don't know. You could call in. and just say
I
hello. It seems like no one wants to ring me on the phone anymore.
oh goodness, it's such a shame.
Yep. So 669-842-1947. Regular toll rates apply. Just follow the voice prompts and tickle those ivories, rotate that
And
rotary phone.
we can hear you, and you can hear you on the
Yeah.
pod, on your car, on your
You
drive
can
home.
you can
You can
tip
tell
and
your
tap on
friends.
phone.
You can tell your friends that you're out there. You've made it.
Exactly. Alrighty. Thanks everybody.
Adios.